Hi friends, hope you're doing well today. Thank you so much for watching my vlog. It's Mother's Day, so happy Mother's Day. If you're a mom or if you're trying to be a mom, I'm praying for you and hoping that God will allow that to happen for you soon. Um, I also think it's important that or not we, but I really want to also say to all of you who are watching that maybe you don't have the best relationship with your mom. Maybe she's not there, or maybe she's passed away. I just want you to know that I'm praying for you, and on this day that may be pretty hard for you, I just hope that you're having a wonderful Sunday and enjoying this day, and hopefully you got to spend some time with God. It's beautiful here in Arkansas, so I hope that it's pretty wherever you are, and that you're getting to see a blessing from God today. But today, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what I talked about in Odessa last week. So if you follow me on social media, you probably saw that I went to Odessa, Texas, which was outstanding. I loved my time there. The people were wonderful, treated me like family. I mean, honestly, the campus pastor and his wife and his family just embraced me and loved on me and made me feel so welcome. And I will definitely never, ever, ever forget going to Odessa, Texas, because I feel like family. So thank you, Odessa, for making me feel so loved. But while I was there, I kind of told my testimony with Craig and hit on, what does it mean to love God? What does that look like? And so I'm just going to kind of briefly talk about my main points that I discussed there, but also I'm going to pull in one more biblical chapter, I guess you could say, to add in. I didn't necessarily put this in Odessa, and I wish that I had, so I'm going to add that in at the end. So, like that at the end. Anyway, so the main things that I talked about while I was there was just basically looking at, okay, so what does it mean to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, everything, every bit of you? I talked about Matthew. Let's see, I have the verse. I talked about Matthew 22:37 through 38, which it talks about loving God with all your heart, mind, and soul, but also telling us that that is the greatest commandment of all. And then later, I believe it's later, let's see. Well, I didn't necessarily talk about it in Odessa, but one of the things I meant to talk about was the fact that also in Matthew, it talks about how we're supposed to love God more than our family, more than anybody. It lists mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, and I think that's very important because all of us, in some way, are a mother, a daughter, a father, a son, a friend. In some way, we have relationships that sometimes we love more so than God. And so if any of those relationships ever get taken away, then we kind of struggle with loving who we feel like took that person away. But sometimes, it's not necessarily just family members. It's also, it can be anything in your life, anything that you love more than God. If God took that away from you, then sometimes we struggle with, do I still love God when I had this thing that I loved and he took it away before I was ready? But I kind of thought a lot about this topic and what love means. And in order to love God fully, I think we have to do three things. Because I think that's what's important, right? Is that we're told to love God no matter what, right? We're told to love him. And sometimes we say, yeah, okay, I love him. I love him. That's pretty easy for me to do. But we're not really thinking about what love consists of. So when our love is tested, it's hard for us to continue to love him. What I mean by this is, whenever you say I love God, what do you mean by that? Do you mean that the same as I love my pet? Or I love, I love doing this one activity. I love this one blessing. Whatever it is, do you mean it the same way? I think in some ways it is the same, but I also think that it's important that we love God in a way that's even more elevated. And so I kind of just spent time defining, what does love mean? What does loving God actually mean? And by having directions and knowing this is the kind of love I want to have for God, by looking at those things, then we can start actually developing a relationship with God that's truly based on love for Him, rather than just the circumstances we're in and whether or not He's giving us what we want or we don't want. And so to do that, the three things that I mentioned in Odessa were, first, that we have to love God enough to surrender our own desires for our lives. I'm going to go into the other biblical chapter that I wanted to talk about in a second on that, but I'm going to list the rest of them first. The second thing that we have to do in order to love God, loving God means to trust God's plan is better than our own. And so the thing here on these two, before I go into the last one, that's important, is the surrendering of desires, right? So if you're a parent, or if you're a friend or husband, wife, anybody, if you've ever loved somebody, a lot of times it means that by loving them, by committing to love that person, you are also having to give up some of your desires. You're supposed to put that person's needs before your own. If we're really loving the other person the way that we should be putting their needs, their desires, all those things before our own. Well, I believe that that's not just with relationships on this earth. I think that's the same between our relationship with God, right? We're supposed to put His needs, although He doesn't really need anything from us, but you know what I'm saying. But His desires for us and what He wants, we're supposed to put that first before our own. And then the second thing, the trust. We say, or at least I've heard, and you most likely have heard in your life, that relationships are built on trust, right? I would agree with that you have to trust the person you're with, or it's just not going to work. You're not going to be a very happy person. You're probably going to struggle with loving that person if you don't trust them, which is where I think a lot of people, whenever they experience a valley in their life or some type of difficult circumstance of whatever genre that is, they struggle with trusting God, because, why would this person who loves me, why would he do this? So now we don't trust him anymore, and that makes us question our faith or question him. And then maybe that makes us pull away from him some. But in committing to love God, we're saying that we trust His judgment. We trust Him no matter what. And I think it's important that we understand that in this one small situation, we may not understand what He's doing and why He's doing it. But we can't allow that to dictate our trust for Him, or just within Him. Because, He can see the big picture, the bigger picture than just our lives. He sees the picture of the entire world's existence, the entire universe's existence. That's pretty crazy. But He sees the entire timeline, and He sees how everything in our life plays a role. And so we have to trust that He is a good Father that knows what He's doing, even if we can't see in this circumstance, in this little hole that we're looking in right now, this little snapshot of our lives, that He can see more than what we can see. And so we have to trust Him. And the final thing I talked about is the fact that love is a choice. We have to choose to love God more than anything else. Every single day, in every single situation, we have to choose. And I think many of us have, I don't know, you may have, maybe not, read the 5 love languages. And one of the things, I read that book several times, but one of the first times that I read it, I remember being kind of disappointed, because the author talked about the fact that love is a choice. And, sometimes it's not going to all be butterflies and rainbows, and you have to still choose to love that person. It was just kind of one of those, well, that was just kind of like a damper in a girl's heart who wants to find her Prince Charming, you know? But it was so right, you know, and sometimes the right thing, the truth, isn't always the best thing to hear, but it's the truth. Um, we have to choose to love God. We have to choose to love others, even when it's difficult, even when they're making it difficult. If it's, the person we're in a relationship with, or our kids, or whoever it is. But people in this life will make it hard to love them, but we're supposed to choose to love them. But even more so, we're supposed to choose to love God, even if we don't understand what he's doing, even if we don't see why we're having to struggle with this pain or go through this difficult circumstance, whatever it is, we have to choose to love him. And in order to do all those things, this is what I didn't include at Odessa, but I kind of thought about later. To do all of these things, I think sometimes we're still like, okay, I know I'm supposed to do that, but I'm still struggling with how to do it. I'm a firm believer that God gives us a plan for how to do things, or shows us how to. I mean, Jesus says, act like me, and so therefore I believe that Jesus would have shown us how to love God that way. And then it kind of hit me. I was getting on the plane whenever I was leaving, and it kind of hit me that God did give us a roadmap of how we're supposed to love him. And that's 1 Corinthians 13. I think many of us look at that chapter on how to love each other, on how to love our neighbor as ourselves. We hear this chapter a lot at weddings because it's a wonderful chapter on how to love. But I also think it's important that we understand that 1 Corinthians 13 was also there to show us how to love God. I'm going to read a little bit of that and just kind of apply it. But I'm going to start at 1 Corinthians 13:4. The first part is still important. So if you read this on your own, I would say read 1 through 4. I'm just going to start it for time's sake. So, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. I'm going to skip down a little bit. So on verse 11. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. So basically in this chapter, it's outlining for us what love looks like. And so instead of applying this to relationships, I want us to try to apply this to God. Okay, love is patient, so we're patient when God's plan looks different than our own. Love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. I think that's important. We don't insist on our way over his. Whatever his desire for our lives is, we choose that over our own. It is not irritable or resentful. I think that's important too. I've heard a lot of people say that they resented God after he took someone away from them, or after they had experienced something very tragic. I think it's important that we're not supposed to resent God. We can be upset, we can cry, we can ask for his help, but I don't think we're ever supposed to resent God. People ask me many times, how are you not mad at God? And, I never really was mad at God, but that's not really my go-to. Anger is not really my go-to a lot of the time. So that was easier for me just because of my personality. But I think it's important that we still reflect on that I reflect on that I can never become resentful towards God, no matter what he takes away from me. And then love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. And I skipped a little part of that's important, but it's talking about seeing things in part. And I just think that that's so important for understanding that God sees everything fully, and we really just, like it says, we only see in a mirror dimly lit. I mean, we cannot see what his plan truly is. And he is a good father that keeps his promises. So even if something difficult has happened to you, he still loves you and he still wants you to trust him that he is taking care of you. And then, of course, it ends with, so now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. So I believe that we're supposed to have faith in God, we're supposed to hope in him and what his plan is, and we're supposed to love him no matter what, because that is the greatest commandment of all, to love him. So I hope that this maybe has spoken to your heart a little bit today and has helped you. Sorry, my allergies are really bad if you haven't been able to tell. It's wonderful allergy season here in Arkansas. But back to what I was saying, I hope that this has maybe spoken to your heart and made you reflect on your love for God and what that really looks like. Maybe try to define that for yourself. I like defining things. I like writing things out. I'm literal like that. I like trying to think about what exactly do I believe on certain things. But I think it's important that we decide right now, whether we're in the middle of a storm or we're out of a storm or we're just trying to figure out our path. You know, right now, kind of sitting down wherever we are and saying, okay, God, I'm going to choose to love you no matter what. And what does that love look like? That means I'm going to be patient no matter what happens. I'm going to trust your plan, and I'm going to surrender my own desires to what you desire for me. And I will choose to love you no matter what. So know that I'm praying for you, everyone who's watching this video, and I pray that it blesses your life. And whatever this Mother's Day means for you, I hope that, if anything, this can just be a wonderful day that you can feel so loved by God. So I love you, friends. Thank you so much for watching my blog, and I'll probably blog next week, but I'll have something for you. So love you all so much. Have a wonderful week.